Gender capitalism. Intrigued? Turned off? I find that when you put gender in the title of a talk, you get some strong reactions. And actually, some part of the audience tunes out. Come on, be honest. It turns out that for those of us in the financial world, the invisible hand of the markets is supposed to make gender, well, irrelevant. And actually, in the women's movement, where I've also worked, capitalism is not to be trusted, and investments are often seen as a weapon, not a tool. But so before I lose many of you, try this, because whether you see this as we are seeing things emerge in the world here of how can I bring more opportunities to bear, because there's a remarkable moment that is both powerful and profitable, and I wouldn't want you to miss it. So a little bit of a spoiler alert. Investors are using gender lens to drive return and mitigate risks. And feminists are using investment tools to create gender equality. So stay with me. We're going to take a look at the why, the how, and actually invite you into the movement. You may have noticed that women's growing economic power is changing the world. You wouldn't be alone. The Economist calls it, forget India, forget China, forget the internet, economic growth will be led by women. Warren Buffett's written blog posts saying he's optimistic about the US because of our women, and the World Bank calls it gender equality is smart economics. So why? Start with the US. Turns out that women are now the majority of degree earners at all levels. They are 1 in 4 families' breadwinners, and around the world there is 1 billion women waiting to join them in that formal economic force. Those women actually have incomes that are growing 40% faster than men, according to Deloitte. Now, what's important about this is that they bring a different set of priorities to their investing. So in an emerging market context, when a woman earns an additional dollar, 80% of that is invested in what's called human resources, her family's health, education, and nutrition. That compares to 30 to 40% for men. So we have what's considered a virtuous cycle of her family gets healthy, her community gets healthy, her country gets healthy. It's also called a gender dividend, and it pays out in GDP growth. But interestingly, women in the US also bring different investing priorities. So at US Trust, we do a lot of research. And we found that women are 30% more likely than men to see their investments as a way to express their values. We might think of them actually as activist investors, although activists, maybe in a way that you've heard woven through the panels today, actively seeking positive social return in a way that is in addition to and maybe inextricably linked with that financial return. And you know what? It's not just about women. So our research on high net worth individuals say over half, 51%, say they see their investments as a way to, the social and environmental impact of their investments is important. And to the conversation that was just before this, millennials, 79% of them say they would take increased risk to create positive social or environmental impact. So here's the question. How would one of these investors, or any of you, use a gender lens to drive that impact and drive that return? Note that I said lens, not limitation, not a screen, not a rigid set of rules, A lens is something that brings things into focus. When you put on your glasses, you see things more clearly. You don't bump into the bed. I need you to put on a pair of gender lens glasses today and imagine they help you see the differences that men and women have when they experience things because of their unique realities, assets and needs, limitations and leadership. Gender lens glasses can help investors in lots of different ways, but just to make it concrete, we'll take a look today at 3 of them. The first, what we were just talking about, is that access to capital, or who gets opportunities to grow business. The second is workplace equality, or thinking about the entire value chain of a company. And the final one is products and services. What is it that the company produces? So let's start with that access to capital. Train your lens over there. Because what will come into view for you is the fact that whether we're talking about a micro entrepreneur in Bogota or a high growth entrepreneur in Boston, whether we're talking about a film director in LA or a fund manager in New York, women have less access to capital. It's been called capital punishment. And savvy investors are actually flipping this to an opportunity. So the World Bank IFC has shown there is this $320 billion credit gap. That's McKinsey's number, actually. And that 37% of formal enterprises in the world are owned by women. So you're seeing things. I was in Tokyo last year for the launch of the World Bank's first women's bond, $185 million ring-fenced to be on-invested through banks around the world in women entrepreneurs. You're seeing new funds come out. Astia Angels just came out with one, gender-inclusive teams. But your lenses are going to show you something else, right? They're going to show you opportunity and barriers. Consider this. Harvard researchers did a study, and they gave investors identical pitch decks, except one half heard from a male voice, the other half a female voice. Investors were 60% more likely to invest in the male voice. Same information. Now, researchers would call this implicit bias, and it affects men and women equally. It's part of pattern recognition. And so we have this, there's a barrier here. We can also think of it as an opportunity for innovation. Consider Village Capital. They're a global incubator accelerator. Highly competitive to participate. Think Y Combinator for social entrepreneurs. Except here's the twist. The investment decisions are made by peer review instead of by outside experts. When I heard this idea, I thought it was terrible. It sounded like Shark Tank meets Survivor. But I came to realize what has happened here is we've flipped the system around. And globally, across their cohort, 15% of the entrepreneurs are women, and 40% of the prize winners are women. Innovations like this that allow us to unleash the opportunities for all entrepreneurs are very powerful for the economy and for the world. In the US, 50% of small and medium businesses, jobs started in the next year will be started by women-led businesses, which is one of the reasons why I'm really proud Bank of America has partnered with the Cherie Blair Foundation to launch Elizabeth Street Capital. Check it out if you haven't seen it. But you also need to look globally. And if we do, we could mitigate climate change. So the FAO, the French equivalent of USAID, has shown that if women entrepreneurs who have small shareholder farms had the same access to productive resources as men, they would increase the yields on their farms by 20 to 30%, drop 100 to 150 million people out of poverty, and reduce deforestation. Okay, but we're not just talking about women entrepreneurs and gender capitalism. Take your lens and look at across the value chain. Start with the board and go all the way through the suppliers and ask lots of questions. Where is it that gender equality could unleash value? Well, at the board level, we know that companies with 3 or more women on their board outperform those with no women by 53% return on equity. if you move, really the exciting factor there is that that gender diversity benefit is not limited at the boardroom door, right? So Harvard researchers have shown that the more women on a team, the better decisions the team will make. You'll see this like in oil and gas companies. They're showing now that gender diverse teams have actually better safety records. And you don't have to be in a public company. Dow Jones issued a report last year. They looked at all of the venture-backed companies in the last decade in the US. The companies that were successful had twice as many female executives. Finally, let's take a look at that supply chain. Consider Walmart's decision last year to increase the sourcing from women entrepreneurs by $20 billion in 5 years. Why'd they do it? Because they realized, one, they needed a robust supply chain. Two, they were looking for product diversity. But three, 80% of their customers said they would be more likely to buy a product if they knew it was from a woman entrepreneur. Finally, take your lens and look at those products and services. One of the first things that's going to come into focus is the fact that women make 78% of global purchasing decisions, control $20 trillion, and we are increasingly picky. 73% of us say we care about the social values of the products that we buy from. And we're not talking about pink laptops and pink pens. We're talking about products that address the fundamental needs, uniquely, of men and women. So take cooking. Around the world, 40% of families depend on solid fuel, think firewood and charcoal, for cooking. Women do 90% of the work to gather this fuel, and every 16 seconds, someone dies from indoor air pollution or cooking smoke. So the UN has shown that actually, if we were able to have a universal rollout of clean cook stoves, we could change this. We could reduce CO2 emissions by 25 to 50%, and obviously save a lot of lives. The challenge, when cook stove companies don't include women across the value chain, the cook stoves end up languishing in product storerooms. But that product lens is not just for emerging market, low resource situations. Think closer to home. When do you think US car companies first tested female crash test dummies in the driver's seat? 2010. What happens with drug companies if we don't get sex disaggregated information from clinical trials? Recall that it was only last year that the FDA issued a new dosage for women in Ambien. Before that, women were walking around sleepwalking because Ambien reacts differently in women and men. Okay, so we have 3 different lenses here, and they overlap. They're not exclusive, but I want to pull them together for you in an example that actually is very important to me. So at US Trust, we have an equity strategy we call the Women and Girls Equality Strategy. We look at companies through these lenses, and we say, how is it that this company is thoughtfully engaging women as employees and leaders, as agents of global change, and as consumers? We've found interesting things emerge. Companies with a smaller pay gap between men and women actually are better actors in their industries. They have fewer environmental penalties, fewer labor fines, fewer product safety recalls. In short, this lens becomes a proxy for good corporate ethics, and we think larger long-term returns. It's actually the fact that last year, the Women and Girls Equality Strategy outperformed its benchmark, the S&P 1500, by 360 basis points. So where does this leave us? We have a movement in this country to say we need new policies to create gender equality. And honestly, we do. And there's also a conversation about increasing philanthropic funding for women and girls, and we should. But I believe that it actually is in the trillions of investment dollars that global change is going to be found. And so the question for you all in the room is, where might a gender lens drive values in your business, in your investing? Because we are at a remarkable moment right now where the needs of the world align with the smart economic path. I invite you to join us in the movement for gender capitalism. Thank you.